This conference will now be recorded.
Now let's look at our final session, which will be on some common servers and their configuration. In the last session, we have already looked at DNS. In this session, we will be looking at MySQL HTTP server and Nfs server. Once again, the disclaimer, this is not a Linux course. The intent is not to tell you about MySQL HTTP server or Nfs server in details. This is just for the people who are trying to learn Hadoop administration. They find it easy to play around with Linux and the components associated with it, right? Because let's say MySQL you might be using in, let's say if you're playing with Ambari from Hotternos distribution, MySQL is used as a backend for it. In Hive, it is used as a metastore. It can be used at a lot of places. In Ranger DB, it could be used for storing state stores and a lot of other things, right? So HTTP web server, a very common web server which you might be using for load balancing, right? For reverse proxying. So I'm talking here only about HTTP. You might use Nginx, or you may use a dedicated proxy like HA proxy, right? And other than that, I will also be talking about Nfs server, which you might use for, let's say, HA of name node, one of the examples, or also in, let's say, NiFi, SDF, you want to share a common set of libraries across multiple nodes, so you can have a common share mount point using an NFS mount, right? So the intent is just to familiarize people with these concepts who are going to use it for Hadoop courses or uh, their journey in Hadoop. So let's start with, let me just pull up my system. So this is the machine which we have been using till now. So first of all, let's look at MySQL, right? Before looking for MySQL, in the last section, I was talking about disk IO stat and few commands, right? Which will help you in narrowing down on what issue a particular disk has, or does a particular disk has any kind of bottlenecks, right? Yeah, we can track those kind of things. But other than that, there are other ways of also testing your performance. For example, by default, present day hardware will have caching at various level, like OS, your OS might have caching, your disk controllers might have caching. So it may be very difficult to give you the exact measure of a throughput or a latency for an IO device, but still we can get a very good approximation, right? So in a virtualized environment, when we go to, let's say, cloud with any of the vendors, it could be very tricky to exactly pinpoint the actual performance, because it will be a shared drive, and many of the things in a virtual world work in a very different way, because there might be an abstraction sitting in between, or a special driver sitting in between, which might be hiding all those details and giving a very different picture, maybe a blotted picture of how the disk is performing. Okay? But let me tell you some few quick examples of that. For example, one good way of testing is, let's say I'm sitting on my virtual machine. So this is the tool which we used to use when we were actually working on bare metal machines, and during the time when the we can control the hardware and lay out its geometry, the disk geometry, right? Which we don't need to do anymore, because they are optimized in a way which is good enough for our what kind of work we do, and the technology has improved a lot. We don't need to play around with that. But in the old days, we can control how your disk geometry will be, how your layout of the tracks will be. You can do a low level formatting. I'm not talking about this format of MKFS. There will be low level formatting also. We can change the disk geometry. I can play around with how many sectors I can have per track and all those kind of things, right? But I'm not going into that section, but I will tell you that same tool, how we can use to test certain things. So the tool is HD Param, right? It's part of a package called hdparam. So if I do -help, it gives you a lot of things. So first caution here: do not run this tool on your production system if you don't understand what it does, right? At your home, in your virtual lab environment, play around with this, right? Because at the most, if you destroy a virtual disk, you can recreate it. But be cautious. Do not run anything in a production system without understanding its implications. So this is a very powerful tool. In this tool, I can go and play around and perform a lot of things. Like I can change the transfer mode of a disk. I can enable, disable the cache controllers. I can do a device reset, right? I can do various things on that, right? So I can put the disk in standby or a sleep mode using these commands. So for example, what we are interested for the time being is these two options: perform device read timings and cache read timings, right? So let's say if I show you, if you remember from my last class, I have SDA and SDB, right? So let's do some test on SDB. So I do a test on SDB. I say dev SDB. It will be doing a read test without the cache, right? So timing buffered disk reads without the cache, right? And with the cache, obviously it will be much higher. So it will be timing your cached reads. So this is a rough indication that it can do this much of MB in a second, right? Directly. But this will not be very accurate for our virtual disk, and especially in a cloud environment where we'll have a very custom drivers written by our vendors, let's say Azure and AWS, which will be doing things in a very hidden way, which we will not be able to see because they will hide the abstraction. But a good indication to start with, right? So why I'm talking about disk performance, because let's say when we talk about MySQL database, or in Hadoop when we talk about, let's say, a journal node, a zookeeper disk, or any let's say HBase performance, right? So the disk is a very important factor, right? So we have to make sure the IOs are optimized and the disk performs well. So how you eliminate that disk is not the bottleneck, right? So it's these tests we can do. So other than the IO stat and things I talked yesterday, right? So what we can do, a good way to test here is, let's write a file, right, and check what is the throughput. For example, let me change to a mount point /mnt where I have mounted SDB1 partition, right? I want to test something here, that what is the throughput here, right? So I will do dd if means input file. Input file is equal to dev0. I'm taking a dev0 device. I'm saying output file, I'm writing it to test.img in the present working directory, because I'm testing the mount point of SDB1, which is in MNT, and I'm sitting in MNT. So I'm saying take an input from dev0, create an output file, test.img. Block size, let's say I say 1 MB, right? Or I can give a bigger block, 1 GB. We are testing throughput. Count is equal to 1. Flags, optional flags, it's like O flags, right? These are the flags which tell us whether the IO which I'm doing, right, how it works. Does it bypass the cache? Does it does a direct, or does it does an asynchronous, right? So I'm saying direct. I'm saying direct. So let me run this. This is with the default setting. I have not modified anything on the disk. This is how you will have. I'm creating a 1 GB file direct. Right. So now the command which I talked about, hdparam, but it also has an option to disable or enable the cache on the controller. By default, that is enabled, right? So I will disable that. Setting drive caching to 0 off. By default, it is 1. 1 means on. I'm setting to 0. I'm setting it off. Means I'm setting the writing cache to 0 now. Now let's do this test again with cache deactivated. So it's writing something. So you can see it is taking a bit longer than what it was taking right initially. So here, although my system is not that loaded, I can see in my case it has not come that difference that much. But if we run this test few times, you will see that this will be running slightly slower with cache deactivated. So this will give you a clear picture on how what is your throughput on the disk, right? Let's say I may be saying my disk has a capability of 200 megabytes per second, but I can test it here. Oh, it is not 200 megabytes per second. It is way less, right? Now see, it has come 42. So always run this test about 5-6 times to get a kind of a average. What is the disk performance? So now it's saying 55 initially. Now it's saying 42. So let's enable it back one here. Okay. I enable the caching back, and let's run this test again. So we are testing with both with caching enabled and caching deactivated, just to get a feel of what is the actual throughput of the disk. So our cloud vendor might be saying that this particular instance type, I don't want to name any instances because I don't want to get into trouble, because I am an ex-employee of few companies. So that instance might say your throughput is 200 IO or IO ops or something like that, right? But does it really give that, right? They don't guarantee it. They say maximum you can get it like that. So it's a good way of testing, right? So depending upon that, we will decide which kind of disk we will use for, let's say, MySQL database, which is also very critical. That's why it's recommended to put it on an SSD for a large cluster from an Ambari perspective, and also from a Hive or Metastore perspective. If I am doing a lot of queries, put it on SSD to improve the performance. And also from a Zookeeper and Journal Node perspective, I will have a lot of HA failures and issues if my disk is not performing well. So it's good to test it there. So this is throughput. Another thing I can do is I can also test latency. Okay, let me just clear these files. 2 files we created. I'm clearing that. So let's test for latency now. Latency is what we are doing is instead of creating a large file, we will create a very small file, 512 bytes, right? And we'll write it, let's say, 1,000 times. Right? Hit enter. So see, the latency is about it's writing about 3.2 MBs per second, right? So it means these many bytes were written 1,000 times, right? 1,000 times. So I can know that one operation is taking how many milliseconds, right? Although this number is very small here, but let's look at with cache deactivated, right? So let me set it to 0. And let's do this test again. Right, again a very small number in my case, because it's a local disk, is giving quite a decent performance for me. But here what actually how you read this is you are saying it is writing 300 megabytes per second, means this much of data, it is 1000 counts it's doing. So for one operation, what is the access required, right? 1000 access requires this many seconds. So one access will require that many milliseconds, right? Although this number is very small, but if you test on a VM from any of the cloud vendors, you will see a significant number there. So this is a good way of testing it. So I can also test using a flag desync, right? So desync means, right? So the IO flags could be direct. It could be um, desync means asynchronous, and it could be sync. Sync means meta, sync for the meta as well, right? So as I said, this is not a Linux course. I will not go into detail, so much detail of that, but I can give here desync, right? So what I'm doing is now I'm syncing it through cache. Means in simple one, it is using a synchronized IO for data, right? Not necessarily cache is not the right word. Synchronized IO for data, and I can also say sync instead of desync. Now it will be using a synchronized IO not only for data but also for metadata. So what kind of thing you are running, whether you are running a database, zookeeper and all, so these will give you, okay, this disk is right for those kind of workload. So these things, tests are very important, especially when we have RAID controllers and all, and RAID disks, right? But all those in cloud world doesn't matter anymore because we are not having RAID controllers and all, right? The second part which I'm talking about, desync and sync. So, okay, so we have tested something. We know now the disk is fine, right? So let's install MySQL. So initially, MySQL used to be part of each Linux distro, each Red Hat or CentOS distro. But after the change in the licensing and Oracle taking over and all, so there has been a fork created. If I do this, for example, it will not find a package. But in the older version, if you go, let's say CentOS 654, you will see it will be shipped with it. But it has been removed now. So instead of this, we have MariaDB now, right? It's a fork of MySQL, although it gives few enhancements, few new engines, but still it's a fork of it. So if I say MySQL install here, it will install me a client, which is a MariaDB client, right? See, you can see the package also. I say yes. Right? I can now install MariaDB, for example. So if I want a server, MariaDB-server, I install this. Right? You can see it's installing MariaDB, which is a MySQL server or variant of a MySQL server. So MariaDB server. So it has an important file etc my.cnf or my.config. So this is the directory where we can specify the configuration. Let's say by default it is writing a data directory where live MySQL, but I can, let's say I were doing the disk testing at MNT mount point, right? Some disk. So I can change the path to that where I see the disk is performing well, or SSD, I will change to that. And in my Hadoop course, you might have seen we set up a lot of parameters here. So those parameters are for large cluster, let's say the InnoDB buffer size, the thread pool size, right? The number of threads and all, right? I'm not going to talk about anything about that. So you can look into the Hadoop course. Over there, I'm talking about all those things. So I say save here, we can modify it. So now once it is installed, I can start this MariaDB. right? I can start this MariaDB service. So I can either do service because I've been using Linux for a very long time, right from 2002. So I got used to the old way of working with services, but here I can use systemctl restart MariaDB the new way, the system D way instead of init D way. So now this service has come up, right? So similar to how you set up, let's say if I say um, MySQL, right? So you can see here, you will see a lot of commands, right? So I have a MySQL admin command here. So the first thing which I need to do is I need to set up a password for it, right? So why we need to set up a password is the first time we install MySQL, it will be, it can drop into a local mode, right? But for production ready, first thing is I have to also run this MySQL secure installation so that it removes that tested databases and all those test users and all. And then I will set up a MySQL password, right? So I can do MySQL admin set root password on this one.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so we have to set up a password for this. So if I simply say MySQL, hit enter, I can do show databases, right? So it does not have a password set. So if I want to set up a password, I have to say MySQL admin hyphen username, which is root by default, and password PSWRD, and the new password, whatever you, let's say I'm setting a password called, let's say my netzilon, right? So now when I'm connecting here, I say -u root -p, and here I will give that password. Now I will be able to connect it, right? So this is how we create it and connect it, and I can give like -h host option within the prompt. Also I can create all those users. And this is a very simple MySQL. So now once MariaDB is services started, let's say I have service MariaDB started, right? So let's say it will be like this in 7 sys system ctl maria status, like this, right? I can say enable means when the system starts, start this service up. So obviously it should be up because it's a database. Your database should be up before any application comes up so that it can start up correctly. So next other thing now we have to look for is in our from our slides is HTTP server and Nfs server. Okay, so HTTP server, simple. I say yum install httpd, right? So I'm installing one. By default listens on port 80. So I say httpd, right? It's inactive. I say start, right? So it starts that service and it starts on port netstat -t lpn, right? I can say here, I can see that port 80, it is listening. Right? So now let's go to what's my IP, 99. Let's see this and try to access it from a browser. The browser is coming up. Let's say I enter this here. right? So it's giving some default page. So I can set up some home page slash where www html. Here I can create a index page. Let's say vi index.html. This is first page. First page. Save it. Right. I go here. I put it here. Right. This is first page. So this is your simple web server. So you might have noticed in our very first class. So the yum which I have set up here, yum repository, right? Cat slash etc yum dot repos. So I've set up with FTP because I did not talk about HTTP in the initial one. So in production, we don't use FTP anymore, right? Although I'm using a secure FTP, but still we don't use that. So we use HTTP. So all this your hosting of your repo will be on HTTP. So what you do is all your repo mount point, you will be copying to, let's say CP your path to that repo directory. You will be copying in where HTML, where www HTML, you will be copying it recursively, and what you will be doing is that repo, right? This is not my repo server. My repo server is a separate one, right? So let's say, let me show you what I mean by that. So cd, or let me do an ls-l slash where ftp pub, right? Here if you look, I have a repo, let's say repo from which all my repositories are coming. So what I will do is I will copy this repository, to the path where www html recursively, right? I will do a cp-r here, cp-r. I will copy it recursively to that repo path. Let's any name, whatever you want there. I can copy it there, and then what I will do inside that HTTP directory. Let's say I'm sitting here. How this HTTP is running? HTTP inside this there will be config files, right? So I have conf file here, right? Right here where I have http.conf file. If you open it, this is the main file where it's controlling, right? The daemon. See, this is the port 80 by default it is listening at, right? So it's controlling that. So instead of modifying a virtual section in the bottom of this file, what I can do is I can go to conf.d and I can create a file, let's say repos.conf, any name, extension should be conf. Open it, and here I can write something like this: server some section, right? I don't remember the entire syntax, I may be slightly wrong, but this is how we do. We write the server section. I can say listen on, let's say you can say listen on port 80. If you want a separate port, you can give a separate port. I can give a server name here, underscore name will be something, right? So something means the actual name of your host. In my case it will be lab.netzelon.com, right? Root, now this is the important thing. Root will be where slash www slash html slash repo. This is the one where we copied our repo, right? And then whenever somebody comes on port 80 and tries to connect to it, it will redirect it here. I don't need to give port 80 here because it's the default port, but I'm just giving an example. I can give a separate port if I want, right? I can give here something like following, simply follow, or location follow. Like syntax for that is something like this. It will be like this. So here I can give okay, index, right? I should be saying index will be index dot, let's say php index.html, right? Right, the what indexes it can take. comma, and I'm saying auto index, right? I can say auto index as well here, auto index on, right? Because it's a repo, and I should enable listing of directory index, right? So I'm saying auto index on, and then I will close it here, right? There might be some syntax error here and there, but this is the idea I'm giving you, right? So now instead of having a repo hosted on FTP, I will be having a repo hosted on HTTP. So this is how we'll do in production. So it will be HTTPS. You will put an SSL certificate, and it will work there, right? So this is HTTP. Now we are left with NFS. So NFS is what, right? So if I do, let's say, service NFS restart, right? It's saying no such service, right? So what happens is there will be service called RPC bind. Let's test that first. RPC bind, right? So all these are packages part of your RPC bind package, right? So how we install that or enable that in CentOS? We have done a minimal install here, right? So I've done a very minimal install. If you check our very first section, so a lot of things will not be there, but NFS by default will be installed if I'm doing other than a minimal install, right? In CentOS 6 and all, it will be installed NFS. I don't need to do anything, but in this case, I need to install that as a service,
This conference will now be
right? So
recorded.
what I need to do in this one is, if I've done a minimal install, I have to do yum install RPC bind, right? So now RPC, because NFS is an RPC service, you need a binding to a port, which will be your dynamic port, and RPC service will run on 111, and it will allocate a port dynamically from services, and that's why we need it, right? So again, you can look into history of that, what it does. So now I can do,
This conference will now be
okay, sorry,
recorded.
sorry guys, I think there was some interruption in the network connectivity. Okay, so I was talking about RPC service, right? So things have changed a lot since the very beginning. If you would have used NFS long back, there used to be a lot of services like RPC port mapper, right? I'm not saying it's not there anymore, but now it's automatically wrapped around one common service, and you can just start few and it works around. Initially, we used to have, let's say, amount D, quota D, right? Those kind of RPC services which we have to start individually, NFS lock, right? All those. But now, let's say if I do a yum install RPC bind and restart this service, and after that, what I need to do is I need to install a package yum install. As I said, it's a minimal install, so nfs-utils is not installed. But if I'm not doing anything, if I'm installing anything other than the minimal install, it will be there. So I don't need to do this step of nfs-utils install. So what it does, it provides me NFS. So I can do service NFS restart, right? NFS is available from that package, and also I can do show mount, right? Show mount means, let's say I want to export something. Let's create a directory mktr/nfs, right? And let's create a file vi/etc exports, right? In this, I make an entry /nfs star read write and sync. So what I'm saying, I've created a directory NFS. Any node, star means any node can access, or I can give a particular network who can access. They can do read write and it's sync. It can be sync async, right? So now I want to check what is after making a change. I have to do export -a, right? So it will export all the file systems which are in there. I can do -v here. It will tell me what it is. That it is word readable, sync, all these options. I can do read write sizes as well, but I'm not going there. It's all no, all squash. I can give a root squash and all, but very simple one, right? So after this, I'm doing show mount. Show mount is also part of NFS utils package. So as I said, if you are not doing minimal install, you don't need to worry. NFS utils will be there. All these will be provided. You don't need to install any package, and you just do service NFS restart. It will come up, and we will make an entry in etc exports, and then do an export fs-a, and I can check from any other system, not only this system. Let's say any other system, I want to check what is the mount point available. 1.99, right? It will show me. So for example, let's say, let me go to any other system. So on that particular system, let's say, let me open a, okay, this is my repo server, right? So let's say I'm on this server and I do this command here. See, from another server whose IP is very different, I'm sitting on this server and this is my NFS which I'm configuring lab server. I want to know what is the share which is exported. I don't know that there's a name called NFS. So how I can do show mount -e, the IP of that. So it is telling me NFS is available for mounting, and this is the permission percentile. Anybody can mount it. So now this mount is available. So I can simply mount it. Let's say I want to mount it anywhere. Let's say I want to mount it across. I want to mount it on this node, right? So let me see what is the mount, what things I have mounted here. Okay, so what I do is I say mount -t file system type NFS, and then I say 192.168.1.99:/NFS. I'm saying MNT, right? So I'm saying file system type is NFS. This is the IP, mount point name to MNT. Now if I do df-h, you can see that that is mounted. So this is mounted from that other node which is running as an NFS server. So when we do, let's say, name node HA, we will have a common shared point where we'll be writing our edits, right, which will be a shared directory, which will be seen by both name nodes. It will be coming from a common mount point. So if I write something here, cd/mnt, let's say I should touch test here, right? Okay, it's a user ID issue, right? Because those IDs, I need to have those correct mount points there. So I will fix that and it will work. Right? So if I do NFS-D here, right? So it's saying root squash, right? By default. So no root squash. If I give, I will be able to write there. So I can do a mount from a particular user and I can write to that. For example, let's say, let me show you. Let me see what user I have. Okay, I have a GSD user. Okay, so I say change ownership GSD of this directory NFS, right? I change the directory, right? So I restart these services. I restart RPC bind as well. So ID GSD, I will just checking 1000. Let's go to another node and I will say whether I have a user or not. Okay, user add GSD -u 1000, right? So I've created with the same UID just to be sure it doesn't conflict, right? Because end of the day it will check UID and it might say, oh, UID doesn't match. So now I will do umount MNT and I will remount. Okay, I'm inside that. Let's come out. I unmount it and I mount it back. Right. So now I change as user GSD and I go to MMT, right? PWD. See, I'm sitting here, ls-l, and I do touch test, right? So I'm able to create it now, right? So same file you can see here, cat test, cat MMT test. Sorry, cat nfs test here. I open this file, write something. This is test. So I'll go to the another machine. I cat here. Right, this is another test. So this is a common one. So root by default you're not able to write because there's a root squash option. I have to say no root squash, all those options up there. So it's preventing root from writing there. So this is a very basic setup. There is a lot of things like when you enable Kerberos, how you do NFS 4 with that, right? All those options we have to take care. I think that's all. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Like I have given you my email ID, right? So let me just write you my email ID once again here. It will be training@netzilon.com. So as most people know, it's not just about training. You can contact me like just for the general guidance. And I'm very straightforward person, right? I'm not. My aim is not to for me, my aim for training is not to earn money, right? I do very few trainings, and I'm very frank and very straightforward. I will say no, don't do training if you are not from this particular background. So if you have any questions, you can reach out. You can watch my YouTube channel. This is my GitHub also. Let me give you my GitHub as well. This is quite famous and used by a lot of people. So Netzilon, if you go here, right? This is my GitHub. This is me. My real name is Gurmukh, right? This is my nickname, Aman, right? Author and all. So all these I maintain. Few of I have taken it, forked it from someone else, like for example, BigTop, but DevOps, Hadoop, I maintain it. I'm also this author of few books. So all this I have, right? So a lot of people are following. So if you go to Hadoop here, you will find all the content which you need for Hadoop. This is what I run with all this config, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any queries with your with Linux networking or anything, right? So I've been in this industry for around 16-17 years now, which is a very long time, right? And I will be more than willing to help. Yeah, thanks very much everyone.